Interest rates are up again, and the Bank of Canada says more raises are coming. Now the bank says that inflation reflects Canadian domestic factors, not the global factors that this government keeps blaming. The government said interest rates will remain low, and then they went on a spending spree. They said it was irresponsible not to spend. They said there would be no inflation, and then they said inflation would just be temporary. And now inflation's out of control and Canadians are paying more. That's right. Will the Prime Minister finally admit that his spending has made life unaffordable for Canadians? That's right.
Today we raised the policy interest rate by 50 basis points to 3.75%. This is the 6th consecutive increase since March, and quantitative tightening continues and is complementing increases in the policy interest rate. We also expect our policy rate will need to increase further.
Canadians are now getting the bill for the Prime Minister's $500 billion of inflationary deficits that first drove up inflation and now drive up interest rates. For a typical family that bought a typical home with a typical mortgage 5 years ago but are now up for renewal, they're paying $7,000 more per year. The Prime Minister said that the government was going to take on all this debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to, as if they don't have to pay back government debt. If that were the case, though, then who's going to pay the extra mortgage payments for these families?
Hear, hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, through the pandemic, we made the decision to support Canadian families, to support workers, to support small businesses, to make sure Canadians could hold on and to make sure our economy could hold on through an unprecedented, historic pandemic. At the same time, we were there to support Canadians as the economy gets going again, and we're there to support them now with help with the GST rebate that's going to arrive in the coming weeks, and with direct support for dental care and for low-income renters. The question, Mr. Speaker, is why are Conservative politicians not choosing to support Canadians on dental and rental?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister caused this inflation crisis. Even Mark Carney, who will be the successor to the current Liberal leader, is saying that inflation is a homegrown problem. He's right. It's caused by the $500 billion of inflationary deficits that have bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest that we pay. And today, rates went up another half point, meaning many families will be handing in their keys to the banks because they won't be able to afford those bills. Has the Prime Minister been briefed by his officials on how many Canadians will lose their homes because of the higher interest rates that his inflationary policies have caused?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, inflation is a worldwide problem right now, but it is a challenge faced by Canadian families that we will continue to support them through. That's why we're delivering supports for families right now in a targeted way, a doubling of the GST credit that will arrive in the coming weeks in their bank accounts, moving forward on support for dental care, moving forward on support for low-income renters, things that the Conservative Party is continuing not just to vote against but to block, and we will continue to do more. We will continue to be there for Canadians during the challenging times ahead, because that's what Canadians expect of their government.
Today, the Bank of Canada has once again hiked its interest rate, and inflation management is not just up to the Bank of Canada. We also have to do our share. Many economists are calling for a recession. People are expecting us to prepare for the future. When will the government stop hiding behind the Bank of Canada and show some leadership? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what this government is doing. Not only are we remaining responsible fiscally to preserve the necessary means if the economic situation gets worse, but we're also here with assistance that is targeted for those who need it, whether it's the 11 million households that will receive a GST refund in coming weeks, or direct assistance to families for dental care, or rental assistance for low-income families. We're helping Canadians to get through these tough times in coming months. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Prime Minister's own former economic advisor has raised concerns of increased household costs because of interest rates going up. He says an average family with a new mortgage before today's new increase could see an increase of $11,000 in extra costs to their annual budget. Most families do not have the ability to absorb that kind of hit. When will this government help families that are reeling with the shock of increasing interest rates?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know how much families are concerned both with rising prices right now and with the specter of increasing interest rates that are going to continue to put pressure on their mortgages, on their savings. This is why we're taking action right now in a targeted way to ensure that we're supporting millions of households, millions of families with GST rebates, with help for dental care, with help for low-income renters, and we're going to continue to make sure we have the capacity to respond if the economic situation worsens for Canadians over the coming months.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions in the future, but he doesn't get it. They told Canadians that interest rates would stay low. They told Canadians that we'd have deflation, not inflation, and that it would be temporary. They spent $500 billion. That's more than every Prime Minister in the history of this country combined. They flooded the market with cheap cash, and they said, don't worry about it. And now the Bank of Canada is cleaning up their mess by raising rates. Will he finally pull his weight around here and stop fueling the fire that he himself has lit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It takes a special kind of Conservative politician to talk about initiatives like the CERB and the CEBA as flooding the market with cheap cash. Mr. Speaker, we are there to support Canadians in a direct way, as we had their backs during the pandemic, as we continue to have their backs right now with the high cost of living. We're always going to be there to support Canadians. Why aren't Conservative politicians stepping up to support Canadians on dental and rental care? That's the question Canadians are asking now.
This Prime Minister's disastrous inflationary policies and reckless spending on the backs of Canadians is sending more families into homeless shelters and food banks, up 30%. This Prime Minister's climate zealot ideology is keeping billions of dollars of investment in our responsible Canadian energy sector in the ground, increasing home heating costs 50% to 100% and making more families stay freezing in the dark. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for his inflationary problems that caused the Bank of Canada's interest rate hikes because of Justin?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm having a hard time following the particular logic that the Conservatives are putting forward today, saying that the reason people are struggling is because we were there to help them in record amounts during the pandemic. We were there to keep food on the table for families struggling from having lost their jobs because of the pandemic. We were there to keep small businesses open, restaurants, neighborhood stores open through a pandemic because we were there with supports because otherwise money wasn't coming in. We invested in the Canadian economy to get through these difficult times, and Conservatives say we shouldn't have done any of that.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Well, let's look at real responsible allies of ours. Let's look at Japan, Switzerland, Taiwan, Hong Kong, who took the right steps and kept inflation under 3%. They didn't print boatloads of money that was valueless and make sure that their citizens got put further into debt. And now Canada has the highest interest rate in the entire G7, pushing more families to food banks and homeless shelters, like we said before. The more this Prime Minister spends, the higher interest rates, the higher just inflation goes. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for just inflation causing higher Bank of Canada interest rate hikes, yes or no?
I just want to remind the honourable members that you can't do indirectly what you can't do directly, and it's nice to play with words and everything, but please, it's a little obvious there. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have worked closely with allies over the past number of months and number of years to ensure that we're increasing our opportunities for citizens, that we're increasing our resilience in our supply chains, and we're working together. Global inflation is hitting all of our allies, whether it be the United States, the UK, France, Germany. All our major partners are facing these challenges. Canadians are doing slightly better than folks in those countries, but that's cold comfort to too many Canadians who are struggling. That's why we're stepping up with direct and more help with a return on the GST credit that's going to land in Canadians' bank accounts in the coming weeks, and dental and rental support that inexplicably Conservatives continue to oppose.